Have you ever discovered a secret that changed everything? I'd love to hear your story. My name is Elena Rousseau, and for most of my life, I was nothing more than a rumor in my father's world. He was a man of power, a diplomat with polished shoes and a smile sharp enough to cut. While the world praised his speeches and the silk of his suits, I stood on the other side of a velvet rope, unacknowledged, unnamed, and uninvited. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments from where are you watching this video. I was born in Montreal to my mother, Colette, an archivist at the embassy library. She never asked for his money, never made noise. But I saw her cry on the nights she held his photograph, hidden inside a French poetry book. I was 13 when I first walked past him on the marble steps of the embassy. He brushed past without looking, adjusting his cufflinks as if I were just another face. But I recognized him instantly. His eyes, his mouth, my features mirrored in silence. That was the first time I understood what erasure felt like. Growing up, I told myself I didn't need him. I studied hard, built a life on my own terms. I graduated top of my class from McGill, entered corporate consulting, and eventually began working just floors beneath the very office he once commanded. But no matter how high I climbed, some part of me always looked downward toward the foundation of my identity, cracked by denial. When he died, I didn't cry. The Montreal Royal Embassy lowered their flags to half-mast. There were headlines, tributes, a state funeral. I received nothing, no phone call, no condolence, just silence. Until 4 weeks later, a letter arrived. No. Return address, cream-colored envelope. My name written in handwriting I'd never seen before but somehow recognized. Miss Elena Rousseau. It read, "You are requested to attend the reading of Ambassador Philippe Duclair's private testament. Enclosed is a key. Please come alone." I froze. My hands trembled as I turned the tiny brass key in my palm. My mind raced. He had left something for me? Why? The next morning, under gray Montreal skies, I stood outside the embassy's eastern wing, an area no longer in use, quietly shuttered after his retirement. The guard looked at my envelope, raised an eyebrow, then let me in. It smelled like old wood, citrus polish, and fading secrets. A woman in a charcoal dress stood waiting for me in the archive room. She introduced herself simply, "Estelle, your father's personal assistant, for many years." I blinked. "You knew about me?" She nodded. "He never said your name aloud, but he kept every photo your mother ever sent." I didn't know what to say. She handed me a wooden chest, dark mahogany, heavy, etched with the family crest I'd seen only on wax seals and embassy walls. This was his final request. Estelle said softly, "To be given to you, and only you." I held the chest close. My breath caught. This wasn't just an object, it was an answer. Back home, I didn't open it right away. I stared at it all night, as if it might speak to me first. When I finally turned the brass key, it gave a soft click. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed by time. My hands shook as I opened it. "Elena," the letter began, in slanted, elegant cursive. "Forgive me. I never had the courage to be your father in life, but I hope I can be something more to you in death." My heart stopped. There were more pages, dozens, each one layered with regret, memories, stories I'd never heard. He wrote of the day he first held me, of how his father, the first Duclair diplomat, refused to allow a scandal, of how my existence would have tarnished the family's royalty eyes. But he also wrote of watching me grow from afar, of attending my graduation in secret, of his pride. And at the end, a single line that changed everything. "I name you, Elena Rousseau, as my sole heir." Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in the comments from where are you watching this video. The rest of the letter outlined a secret trust, assets, and properties, none of which were known to the public or to his other legitimate children. He had two, a son and a daughter, both raised with silver spoons and press coverage. I'd seen their photos in magazines, watched their televised speeches, and now, I was about to stand beside them in court. No one knew about this letter yet, not even them. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt terrified, because I suddenly realized I wasn't just holding a secret, I was holding a storm. And my half-siblings, they weren't going to let their legacy go without a war. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed your life forever? After reading my father's final letter, my hands went cold. I sat for hours in silence staring at that chest, the brittle paper, the signature that once denied me, now declaring me everything. I hadn't planned on revenge. I hadn't planned on anything at all. But the moment I walked into the Duclair family estate, the temperature dropped. The lawyers called it a courtesy gathering, an informal reading of the known public will. Philippe Duclair had left most of his estate to his two legitimate children, Charles and Vivienne. Titles, property, reputation, a clean legacy, clean, until I showed up. The room went silent when I entered. Their eyes scanned me, confused. Charles stood first, tall, sharp-suited, his father's chin. I'm sorry, this is a private meeting. Vivienne narrowed her eyes. Do you know her? Not officially, I said, stepping forward. But I think we're related. You could have heard the wood in the floor groan. The lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. Miss Rousseau is here because of a private testament left by the ambassador. I've reviewed the documents. They're valid. Charles laughed. No, that's not possible. We would have known. We would have been told. I locked eyes with him. He left a letter. He named me. Vivienne's jaw tightened. He wouldn't. He was too careful. He wouldn't ruin everything. But he had. The private will was real. The assets? Massive. More than they'd expected. Hidden properties. Undisclosed accounts. And all in my name. Their faces changed. The grief they'd performed earlier evaporated. What replaced it was raw, trembling rage. Charles stood. We'll contest this. He was old, manipulated, probably confused. I smiled, but it hurt to do so. He remembered more than you think, including the daughter he was forced to forget. They left in a storm of insulted dignity, but I stayed seated numb. What had I done? I hadn't asked for this. I never wanted their inheritance, just recognition, an apology, a truth that could put my mother's ghost to rest. But now I was part of the Duclair bloodline, whether they liked it or not. A few days later, I returned to the embassy. I stood outside the very office my father once occupied. The crest still hung on the wall, polished, proud. Estelle met me again. They're going to drag this into court, I said quietly. I can feel it. She nodded. They're scared of you now. Why? I'm not like them. I didn't grow up with power or titles. I'm just me. She studied me for a long moment, then said something I'll never forget. You're dangerous to them, Elena. Not because you have something to gain, but because you've survived everything they've never had to face. And you still walked in with your spine straight. The words sat heavy in my chest. Later that week, I received a call from a journalist. Somehow news had leaked, not about the private will, but about an unknown woman who attended the Duclair legal meeting. I refused to speak, but I knew this was just the beginning. The following week, I was served court documents. Charles and Vivienne were contesting the private testament, claiming emotional manipulation, questionable mental capacity, forged documents. They were throwing everything at the wall, but I had the letter, and the chest, and Estelle, who had watched my father draft the very words they were trying to erase. Still, I was scared. This wasn't just legal. This was personal. I was walking into a courtroom not just to prove I was heir, but to prove I existed, that my mother's love was not a scandal, that I had a right to stand in the same place they had always called home. The night before the hearing, I visited my mother's grave. It was raining. I brought a rose, a real one, white. I wish you were here, I whispered. The wind answered in soft, chilly silence. I looked up and saw something strange, an old man in a tan coat, sitting on the bench across from me, watching. He didn't speak, but he nodded, once, like he knew me. I left without looking back. The next day, the courtroom buzzed with reporters. I wore black, with one of my mother's vintage brooches pinned at my shoulder. A small amber stone, the one she used to wear during winter. Charles looked smug. Vivienne looked like stone. Their lawyer began the attack. She was a product of an affair, never acknowledged, never adopted. She's no Duclair. My attorney calmly opened the letter, then explained this. In the ambassador's own words, his ink, his will. Gasps filled the room as the judge read the final sentence aloud. I name her my heir, not out of guilt, but out of recognition long denied. The hearing lasted hours, cross-examinations, doubt, character attacks. But through it all I stood still, because I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for every time my mother was called a mistake, for every moment I was told I wasn't enough. By the time the judge called recess, I was shaking, but I didn't cry, not until I walked out into the hallway and saw Estelle waiting for me. She took my hand. He wasn't brave enough in life, but he left this for you. Don't let them take it. I nodded, because I knew. This wasn't just inheritance. This was identity. How did you like my video? Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for your name, your truth? I'd love to hear how you claimed it. The court proceedings dragged on for 3 more weeks. 3 weeks of accusations, newspaper headlines, hushed whispers in the embassy corridors. My father's secret daughter, the hidden heir of Ambassador Duclair, Elena Rousseau, truth or opportunist. It felt like standing in the middle of a hurricane alone, while the world decided whether I deserved to be believed. Vivian brought forward family letters. Charles brought in psychiatrists to question my father's state of mind. They argued that the signature wasn't his, that Estelle manipulated him, that I manipulated him. I sat still through it all, because I had something they didn't. Peace that came from knowing my mother had never lied, that I hadn't imagined the pain, that I was, and always, had been, his daughter. I kept replaying the final words of his letter in my mind like a mantra. I denied you because I was afraid of losing everything. But in truth, you were the only part of me I never regretted. On the final day of court, my attorney stood to deliver our closing. She didn't talk about money or legacy. She talked about silence, about how silence can be used like a weapon to erase someone from history, to make a woman and her child disappear simply because their existence doesn't fit a polished narrative. And then she placed the brooch my mother had worn, now mine, on the witness stand. This is what Elena brings into this courtroom, she said. Not greed, not entitlement, but memory, a mother's love, and a daughter's truth. The courtroom went still. Even Vivian looked down. 2 days later, the judgment arrived. The private testament was upheld. I was declared the rightful heir. The estate would be divided, not equally, but truthfully. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I went home, sat at my desk, and wrote a letter to my father. Philippe, I wrote, I wish you had written those words to me in life. I wish you had stood beside me in the light, not hidden me in the dark. But I forgive you, not for your sake but for mine. I sealed the letter, placed it back inside the mahogany chest, then I closed it, for good. In the months that followed, I received a formal invitation to the embassy. The new ambassador wanted to honor the legacy of Philippe Duclair and acknowledge the truth of the past. They offered me a room, not a grand one, not golden or glossy, but a corner office in the archival wing, where my mother used to work. I took it, not because I needed the title, but because it felt like a full circle. One afternoon, while organizing the old family files, I found a faded photograph tucked behind an old map. It was a candid shot from the early 80s. My mother, younger than I'd ever seen her, holding me as a baby on the embassy lawn, and behind us, half in shadow, half in sun, was Philippe, smiling, watching us. He hadn't been in the official records, but somehow, that moment had still been captured. I wept quietly that day, because history doesn't always live in courtrooms or official papers. Sometimes, it lives in the photographs they tried to forget. Sometimes, it survives in the blood they tried to deny. Today, I walk the marble halls my father once ruled, not as a shadow, but as a woman with her head held high. I wear my mother's brooch on my blazer. I sign my name fully, Elena Rousseau Duclair, not to prove anything, but to remind myself, I was never nothing. I was the final secret he tried to bury, and the only truth he couldn't silence.